Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Same-sex weddings took place across the country this weekend after the Supreme Court ruled all 50 states must now permit LGBTQ couples, quote, the fundamental right to marry. The historic decision puts an end to marriage equality bans that remained in 14 states, impacting tens of thousands of couples. The plaintiff in the case, Jim Obergefell, celebrated the victory.
Today's ruling from the Supreme Court affirms what millions across this country already know to be true in our hearts. Our love is equal. That the four words etched onto the front of the Supreme Court, equal justice under law, apply to us, too. It's my hope that the term gay marriage will soon be a thing of the past. That from this day forward, it will simply be marriage. And our nation will be better off because of it.
Obergefell's home state of Ohio had refused to recognize his marriage on the death certificate of his late husband, John Arthur. Friday's ruling coincided with Pride Day events across the country this weekend, drawing hundreds of thousands of people to the streets in celebration. We'll have more on the Supreme Court's marriage equality ruling after headlines. Funerals continue in South Carolina for the African-American victims of the massacre at Emmanuel AME Church. Laid to rest this weekend were Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Tawanza Sanders, and the Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor. On Friday, President Obama delivered the eulogy at the funeral for South Carolina State Senator and Reverend Clemente Pinckney, the pastor of Emmanuel AME. In his address, Obama urged the nation to tackle racial bias and inequities in the political, economic, and judicial system.
For too long, we've been blind to the way past injustices continue to shape the present. That's right. Perhaps we see that now. Perhaps this tragedy causes us to ask some tough questions about how we can permit so many of our children to languish in poverty, or attend dilapidated schools, or grow up without prospects for a job or for a career. Perhaps it causes us to examine what we're doing to cause some of our children to hate. Perhaps it softens hearts towards those lost young men, tens and tens of thousands caught up in the criminal justice system, and lead us to make sure that that system's not infected with bias.
President Obama closed his address by leading the crowd in a version of Amazing Grace. The following day, a 30-year-old African-American woman was arrested at the state capitol after scaling the 30-foot flagpole and unhooking the Confederate flag. As police officers shouted at her to come down, Bree Newsom shimmied to the top of the flagpole, took the flag in her hand, and said, "In the name of God, this flag comes down today." The action went viral and was seen around the world. We were at the jail where Bree Newsom and Jimmy Tyson were taken after their arrest. We spoke with their supporters at the jail in Colombia. We'll have more on the story later in the broadcast. Greece's standoff with international creditors has intensified with emergency banking measures and a plan to put austerity demands to a popular vote. Over the weekend, Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras announced a national referendum for next Sunday on whether the country should accept the terms of a new international bailout. European creditors want Greece to accept an austerity package in exchange for new loans that would help it avoid a default. The European Central Bank followed by rejecting Greece's request to extend emergency loan program until after the vote. In response, Prime Minister Tsipras announced the closure of Greek banks and the stock market, as well as restrictions on bank transfers. Tsipras called the rejection of a loan extension blackmail.
It is more than obvious that this decision has no other purpose but to blackmail the Greek people and to obstruct the smooth democratic processes of the referendum. One thing is certain, the rejection of the request for a short extension and the attempt to cancel a democratic process is an insult and a shame for the democratic traditions of Europe.
Tsipras has urged voters to reject the bailout terms, saying creditors want Greece to abandon our dignity. Greek banks will remain closed until after Sunday's referendum. Bank machines are reopening today with withdrawal limits of around $66. Greece faces a Tuesday deadline to make a $1.8 billion payment to the IMF or face a default. The Iran nuclear talks are likely to miss Tuesday's deadline for a comprehensive agreement. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has returned to Iran to discuss a final negotiation position with the country's top leadership. Ahead of Zarif's departure, Secretary of State John Kerry acknowledged gaps remain.
I think it's fair to say that we're hopeful. We have a lot of hard work to do. There's some very tough issues, and I think we all look forward to getting down to the final effort here to see whether or not a deal is possible. I think everybody would like to see an agreement, but we have to work through some difficult issues.
The outstanding differences include access to international inspectors and Iranian nuclear activity in the deal's final years. Dozens of people were killed on 3 continents Friday in attacks tied to the self-proclaimed Islamic State. In Tunisia, a lone gunman shot dead 38 people in the resort town of Sousse before being killed by police. Most of the victims were European tourists. A witness described the attack.
We were lying at the beach. Everything was fine. It was paradise, beautiful sea, and everything was good. And suddenly, make pop, 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 and we thought it was firework over there. They were practicing something, and then everybody suddenly stand up, and they were running really fast. And everyone cried, "Run, run, 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 run!" And also the security, they all called us to run, go into your rooms, run away.
ISIL has claimed responsibility for the Tunisia massacre. Thousands of Tunisians marched in Sousse on Saturday to denounce the killings and show solidarity with the victims. ISIL also took credit for a simultaneous attack in Kuwait where a suicide bomber killed 27 people at a Shiite mosque. Kuwait has identified the bomber as a Saudi citizen who flew into the country just hours before. Thousands of Shiites and Sunnis marched in Kuwait City Saturday in a mass funeral procession for the victims. Meanwhile, in France, 2 militants attacked a U.S.-owned factory in the town of Grenoble, leaving 1 victim decapitated and several others wounded. The attackers tried to blow up the factory by ramming their car into gas containers. The decapitated victim had employed one of the 2 suspects. The attackers reportedly carried an ISIL flag and covered the victim's head in Arabic script. Thousands of people marched in Rome Sunday to promote Pope Francis's historic call for global action on climate change. A Vatican encyclical this month urged world leaders to pay their grave social debt to the poor and take swift action to save the planet from environmental ruin. A march participant said the cause of the climate justice unites all faiths.
I think what it's saying is that globally, the moral and the spiritual concern has grown, and the fact that there's so many different faiths says that communities are willing to put aside their differences and their different faiths to come together on a common issue. So whether it's the Pope through the encyclical, or it's the Muslim community, or the Christian community, or the Catholic community, we have all come together to address it because it's an issue that affects all of us as human beings.
The Vatican is hosting a conference on climate change this week with activists and scientists from around the world. A 3-week manhunt has ended in New York after 2 escaped murderers were shot by law enforcement. One of them was killed near the Canadian border. David Sweat was shot and arrested Sunday afternoon near Coveytown. His capture comes 2 days after a federal agent shot dead his fellow escapee, Richard Matt. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced the manhunt is over.
The nightmare is finally over. It took 22 days. But we can now confirm, as of 2 days ago, as you know, Mr. Matt is deceased, and the other escapee, Mr. Sweat, is in custody. He's in stable condition. And let's give a big round of applause to the men and women of law enforcement who have done a great job.
The prisoners used power tools to drill through the walls and break out of the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora. 2 prison workers have been arrested for allegedly aiding their escape. And Puerto Rico has announced it will not be able to pay back its $72 billion in public debt. State officials are reportedly seeking to delay payments in talks with creditors. Puerto Rico's governor, Alejandro Garcia Padilla, is reportedly set to call for hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts in a budget address today. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.